Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The pulsing beat reverberated through the concrete, drawing curious glances from passers-by. A small group of friends huddled near the entrance, their excited chatter barely audible over the muffled music. Among them stood Aiden, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, uncertainty etched across his face. "Come on, man," his friend Chris urged, clapping him on the shoulder. "It'll be fun." Aiden hesitated, eyeing the neon sign that flickered above the club's entrance. The rhythm pit. It sounded intense, maybe too intense for his usual tastes, but his friends had been raving about this place for weeks, and he'd finally caved to their persistent invitations. All right, he conceded with a nervous chuckle. "Let's do this." As they approached the bouncer, Aiden fumbled for his ID, nearly dropping it in his nervousness. The burly man at the door barely glanced at it before waving them through. The moment they stepped inside, the music hit Aiden like a physical force. The club was a cavern of sound and light. Lasers cut through clouds of artificial fog, painting abstract patterns on the writhing mass of bodies on the dance floor. The bass was so powerful that Aiden could feel it in his chest, each beat like a second heartbeat. "Wow," he breathed, though he doubted anyone could hear him over the din. Chris grinned, shouting to be heard. "Told you it was something else!" They made their way to the bar, weaving through the crowd. Aiden found himself moving to the rhythm almost unconsciously, his body responding to the music in a way he'd never experienced before. By the time they reached the bar, he was grinning from ear to ear. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked, her voice somehow cutting through the noise. "Whatever's on tap," Aiden replied, surprising himself with his boldness. As he sipped his beer, Aiden's eyes were drawn back to the dance floor. The energy was infectious, and he found himself tapping his foot, itching to join the crowd. "You want to dance?" Chris's girlfriend, Megan, asked, noticing his interest. Aiden hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I do." They pushed their way onto the dance floor, and Aiden let the music take over. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced before. The rhythms seemed to flow through him, guiding his movements. He closed his eyes, losing himself in the beat. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. By the time they stumbled out of the club in the early hours of the morning, Aiden was exhilarated and exhausted in equal measure. "So, what did you think?" Chris asked as they walked down the quiet street. Aiden grinned, still buzzing from the experience. "It was incredible. When can we go back?" From that night on, Aiden was hooked. The rhythm pit became his second home. Every weekend, and sometimes during the week, he'd find himself drawn back to the pulsing beat and electric atmosphere. His friends were amused by his newfound passion, but they couldn't keep up with his enthusiasm. "You're going again?" Megan asked one Friday night, eyebrows raised. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" Aiden shook his head, already changing into his clubbing outfit, a dark blue button-down and black jeans. "Never. It's like, I don't know. It's where I feel most alive." As the weeks turned into months, Aiden's life began to revolve around the club. He started taking dance classes, determined to improve his skills. He listened to electronic music constantly, trying to recreate the feeling of the club wherever he went. His friends started to worry, but Aiden brushed off their concerns. Then, one fateful night, Aiden arrived at the rhythm pit to find the doors closed. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring in confusion. A notice was taped to the door. "Closed for renovations. Reopening soon under new management." Aiden felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. He stood there, staring at the notice, long after the rest of the crowd had dispersed. It was Chris who finally found him there, still in shock. "Hey, man," Chris said gently. "I heard what happened. You okay?" Aiden shook his head, unable to find the words. The club had become such an integral part of his life that he felt lost without it. The next few weeks were tough. Aiden tried other clubs, but none of them came close to capturing the magic of the rhythm pit. He felt restless, unsatisfied, like a part of him was missing. Then, finally, a new notice appeared on the club's door. Grand reopening this Friday. New management, new rules, ladies only. Aiden's heart sank. Ladies only? He stood there reading and rereading the notice, trying to make sense of it. How could they do this? How could they take away the one place where he felt truly alive? Desperate, he tracked down the new owner, a stern-looking woman named Vivian. He pleaded his case, explaining how much the club meant to him. Vivian listened impassively, then spoke.
I understand your passion, but rules are rules. Unless you're willing to make some changes, I'm afraid the rhythm pit is no longer for you.
Changes? Aiden asked, confused. What kind of changes? Vivian's lips curled into a small smile. Well, if you're truly dedicated to the music, to the dance, we might be able to work something out, but it would require a complete transformation. You'd have to become one of us. Aiden's mind raced. Become one of them? Did she mean... The idea was absurd, impossible. And yet, as he thought about never experiencing the thrill of the rhythm pit again, he found himself considering it. What exactly would this transformation entail? He asked hesitantly. Vivian explained the process, a combination of hormone therapy, surgery, and a complete lifestyle change. Aiden would have to leave his old life behind entirely, becoming a new person in every sense of the word. It was an insane proposition. Aiden knew he should walk away, find a new hobby, move on with his life. But the pull of the music, the memory of how alive he felt on that dance floor was too strong to resist. I'll do it, he heard himself say, almost in disbelief at his own words. The next few months were a whirlwind of changes. Aiden began hormone therapy, watching in fascination and trepidation as his body began to change. He grew his hair out, learned to apply makeup, and started building a new wardrobe. All the while, he continued his dance classes, pushing himself harder than ever. Finally, the day came when Vivian deemed him ready. She helped him choose a new name, Lexi, and gave him a job as a dancer at the club. The first night Lexi stepped into the rhythm pit as a woman was like being reborn. The familiar beat washed over her, but everything felt new and exciting. She moved to the music with a grace and confidence she'd never known before, losing herself in the rhythm. As the weeks passed, Lexi's life became increasingly centered around the club. She lived in the apartments above, rarely venturing out into the world beyond. Her days were filled with dance practice and preparation for each night's performance. One evening, as Lexi was getting ready for her shift, she overheard a conversation between two other dancers. Did you hear? Chris and Megan are thinking of buying this place. Lexi froze, her mascara wand hovering inches from her eye. Chris and Megan? Her old friends? She hadn't thought about them in months. Yeah, apparently they've done really well with their tech startup. They're looking to diversify their investments. Lexi's mind raced. What would happen if Chris and Megan bought the club? Would they recognize her? Would they try to change things back to how they were? For a moment, panic gripped her. But then the familiar thump of the bass began to vibrate through the floor, and Lexi felt herself relax. Whatever happened, she had the music. As long as she could keep dancing, keep feeling that rhythm in her bones, she'd be okay. She finished applying her makeup and headed downstairs. As she stepped onto the dance floor, the lights dimmed and the music swelled. Lexi closed her eyes, let the beat flow through her, and began to dance. In that moment, nothing else mattered. She was home. The crowd cheered as Lexi twirled and swayed, her movements perfectly in sync with the pulsing rhythm. Sweat glistened on her skin, catching the flashing lights in a dazzling display. This was where she belonged, where she felt most alive. As the night wore on, Lexi's thoughts drifted back to the conversation she'd overheard. Chris and Megan potentially buying the club. It seemed surreal. They had been such a big part of her past life, and now they might unknowingly become a part of her new one. During her break, Lexi slipped into a quiet corner of the club, sipping water and watching the crowd. She tried to imagine how Chris and Megan might change things if they took over. Would they keep the ladies-only policy? Would they recognize her if they saw her? A pang of nostalgia hit her as she remembered those first nights at the rhythm pit, when she was still Aiden. How nervous she'd been, how exhilarated. In many ways, those feelings hadn't changed. She still got a thrill every time she stepped onto the dance floor, but now it was more than just enjoyment. It was her life, her identity. Lexi's reverie was interrupted by Vivian's voice. "Everything okay, Lexi? You seem distracted tonight." Lexi looked up, offering a small smile. "Just thinking about the future, I guess. I heard some rumors about new owners." Vivian's expression remained neutral, but Lexi caught a flicker of something concern in her eyes.
Nothing's set in stone yet, but don't worry, I wouldn't let anyone buy this place if I thought they'd change its essence. This is your home, Lexi.
"I wouldn't let anyone take that away from you." Lexi nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude towards the woman who had made all of this possible. "Thank you, Vivian, for everything." As Vivian walked away, Lexi took a deep breath, centering herself. Whatever changes might come, she would face them. She had survived one massive transformation already. She could handle whatever life threw at her next. The rest of the night passed in a blur of music and movement. As the last patrons filed out and the lights came up, Lexi found herself lingering on the dance floor, not quite ready to let go of the night's energy. "Great show tonight," one of the other dancers, Tara, called out as she headed for the exit. "You really killed it out there." Lexi grinned, feeling a warm glow of pride. "Thanks. See you tomorrow." Tara nodded, waving as she left. Lexi took one last look around the empty club before heading upstairs to her apartment. As she got ready for bed, Lexi caught sight of herself in the mirror. Sometimes she still did a double take, marveling at the changes in her appearance. Her long, dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, framing a face that was softer, more delicate than it had once been. Her body had curves now, accentuated by the form-fitting dance outfit she wore. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed. There was a confidence in her eyes, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. She was Lexi now, through and through. As she drifted off to sleep, the bass from the club still thrumming faintly through the floor, Lexi felt a sense of contentment wash over her. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them head on. She had found her rhythm, her place in the world, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The next morning, Lexi woke to the sounds of construction in the street below. Rubbing sleep from her eyes, she padded over to the window and peered out. A group of workers were setting up scaffolding on the building across the street. The neighborhood was changing, gentrifying. It was another reminder that nothing stayed the same forever. As she went through her morning routine, stretching, a light breakfast, then dance practice, Lexi's mind kept returning to the possibility of new ownership. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on perfecting a new routine she'd been working on. But the uncertainty lingered, like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect melody. Later that afternoon, as Lexi was heading down to the club for her pre-show preparations, she ran into Vivian in the stairwell. The older woman looked uncharacteristically flustered. "Oh, Lexi," Vivian said, seeming startled to see her. "I was just coming to find you. Do you have a moment?" Lexi nodded, her heartbeat quickening. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Vivian hesitated, then gestured for Lexi to follow her into her office. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face Lexi with a serious expression. "I wanted you to hear this from me first," Vivian began. "The rumors are true. I've received an offer to buy the club." Lexi felt her stomach drop. From Chris and Megan? Vivian's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You know them?" "I used to," Lexi admitted. "Before, they were friends of mine." Understanding dawned on Vivian's face. "I see. Well, yes, it's them. They've made a very generous offer, and frankly, I'm considering it. But I wanted to talk to you first. Lexi took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What does this mean for the club? For me? Vivian reached out, placing a comforting hand on Lexi's arm. That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Chris and Megan have some ideas for changes, but they've also made it clear that they want to keep the essence of the rhythm pit intact. They specifically mentioned wanting to keep our top performers. Lexi's mind was reeling. Chris and Megan wanted to keep her? Did they know who she was? The questions tumbled over each other in her mind. Have they seen me perform? Lexi asked hesitantly. Vivian shook her head. No, not yet, but they've heard about you. Your reputation precedes you, Lexi. You're the heart and soul of this place now. A mix of pride and anxiety swelled in Lexi's chest. She was touched that her performances had made such an impact, but the idea of facing Chris and Megan in her new identity was terrifying. What kind of changes are they proposing? Lexi asked, trying to focus on the practical aspects. Vivian sighed. They want to open the club up to a wider audience, not completely. They like the idea of having certain nights be ladies only, but they want to make it more inclusive overall. Lexi nodded slowly, processing this information. Part of her rebelled against the idea of changing anything about the rhythm pit. It had become her sanctuary, her whole world. But another part of her, a part she'd almost forgotten, remembered the thrill of those first nights here, when the crowd was diverse and the energy was electric. What do you think? Vivian asked gently. I know this place means everything to you, Lexi. If you're not comfortable with these changes, I'll turn down the offer. You're more important to me than any amount of money. Lexi felt a lump form in her throat at Vivian's words. This woman had given her a new life, a purpose. She owed her everything. I think we should hear them out, Lexi said finally. Maybe change doesn't have to be a bad thing, as long as the music keeps playing, right? Vivian smiled, squeezing Lexi's arm. That's my girl, always dancing to your own beat. As Lexi left Vivian's office, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, excitement, nostalgia, hope. They all swirled together like the lights on the dance floor. She made her way down to the club, the familiar thump of the bass growing louder with each step. Standing in the empty club, Lexi closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. Whatever changes might come, this feeling, this connection to the rhythm, to the dance, would always be a part of her. She had transformed once to keep it in her life. She could adapt again if she needed to. Opening her eyes, Lexi began to move, her body finding the beat instinctively. As she danced alone in the club that had become her home, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was Lexi now, strong and confident. She could face whatever the future held, as long as she never lost the music in her soul. The night of Chris and Megan's visit arrived sooner than Lexi had anticipated. As she applied her makeup in the dressing room, her hands trembled slightly. She opted for a bold look, smoky eyes and deep red lips, hoping it would make her less recognizable. You've got this, Lexi, Tara reassured her, noticing her nervousness. Just do what you always do. You're going to blow them away. Lexi nodded, grateful for the support. She smoothed down her outfit, a shimmering silver bodysuit that caught the light with every movement, and took a deep breath. It was showtime. As she stepped onto the dance floor, Lexi scanned the crowd. Her heart skipped a beat when she spotted them, Chris and Megan, seated at a VIP table near the stage. They looked older, more polished than she remembered, but still unmistakably her old friends. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. What if they recognized her? What if they didn't want her here once they knew the truth? But then the music started, and all her doubts melted away. Lexi began to move, letting the rhythm guide her. She poured everything into her performance, all her fears, her hopes, her journey. As she danced, she caught glimpses of Chris and Megan's faces. They looked entranced, clearly impressed by what they were seeing. As the set came to an end, Lexi struck her final pose, chest heaving, sweat glistening on her skin. The crowd erupted in applause, with Chris and Megan on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Backstage, Vivian was waiting for her. "They want to meet you," she said, a mix of pride and concern in her voice.
Are you ready for this?
Lexi nodded, her heart pounding. As ready as I'll ever be. They made their way to the VIP area, where Chris and Megan were waiting. Up close, Lexi could see the years etched on their faces, laugh lines around their eyes, a touch of gray at Chris's temples. They looked happy, successful. "Chris, Megan, I'd like you to meet our star performer, Lexi," Vivian introduced. Lexi held her breath as Chris and Megan turned to her. There was a moment of silence, and then, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lexi," Megan said warmly. "Your performance was absolutely incredible." Chris nodded in agreement. "I've never seen anything like it. You really embody the spirit of this place." Lexi felt a wave of relief wash over her. They didn't recognize her. Part of her was disappointed, but mostly she was grateful for the chance to interact with them as Lexi, not as a ghost from their past. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt.
"The rhythm pit means everything to me. I'm glad you enjoyed the show."
They chatted for a while, with Chris and Megan asking about her background in dance and her experiences at the club. Lexi answered carefully, sticking as close to the truth as she could without revealing too much. As the conversation went on, Lexi found herself relaxing. Chris and Megan were just as kind and enthusiastic as she remembered. Their ideas for the club were exciting. They wanted to expand the dance programs, bring in guest DJs, maybe even start a record label. "We want to keep the spirit of the rhythm pit alive," Megan explained. "But we also want to help it grow, to reach more people. What do you think, Lexi?" Lexi considered for a moment. I think that sounds amazing."
"As long as we keep the music at the heart of everything, I'm on board." Chris grinned. "That's exactly what we wanted to hear. We're hoping you'll stay on as our lead performer and help us shape the future of the rhythm pit."
Lexi felt a surge of excitement. This was more than she could have hoped for. Not only would she be able to keep dancing, but she'd have a say in the club's direction. "I'd be honored," she said, meaning every word. As Chris and Megan said their goodbyes, promising to be in touch soon to discuss details, Lexi caught Vivian's eye. The older woman was beaming with pride. Later that night, as Lexi lay in bed, replaying the evening's events in her mind, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Her past and present had collided, and she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. She thought about how far she'd come, from that nervous young man stepping into the rhythm pit for the first time, to the confident woman she was now. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. As she drifted off to sleep, the faint thump of the bass still pulsing through the floor, Lexi smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rhythms to master. But she was ready. She had found her beat, and she would keep dancing to it, no matter what. The weeks following Chris and Megan's visit were a whirlwind of activity. The sale of the club went through, and changes began almost immediately. Lexi found herself in meeting after meeting, discussing everything from new sound systems to expanded dance classes. Through it all, she marveled at how seamlessly she had been integrated into the decision-making process. Chris and Megan valued her input, often deferring to her expertise when it came to matters of performance and music selection. It was a level of respect she hadn't realized she'd been craving. One afternoon, as they were wrapping up a particularly long strategy session, Megan pulled Lexi aside.
"I hope you know how much we appreciate you, Lexi,"
she said warmly. "Your passion for this place, for the music, it reminds me of an old friend." Lexi's heart skipped a beat. "Oh?" she managed, trying to keep her voice neutral. Megan's eyes took on a faraway look.
"Yeah, a guy we used to come here with. Aiden. He loved this place so much. We lost touch with him a while back, but being here, working with you, It brings back good memories. Lexi swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to reveal the truth, to bridge the gap between her past and present. But another part, the part that had worked so hard to become Lexi, held her back. "He sounds like he was a great friend," Lexi said finally. Megan nodded, smiling sadly. "He was. I hope he's found happiness wherever he is now." As Megan walked away, Lexi felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Sadness for the friendships she'd left behind, gratitude for the new connections she'd formed, and a deep, abiding joy for the life she'd created for herself. That night, as Lexi prepared for her performance, she thought about Aiden, not with regret or longing, but with a kind of fond remembrance. Aiden had brought her to this place, had recognized the pull of the music, but it was Lexi who had truly found her home here. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights dimming around her, Lexi felt a surge of confidence. The music started, a slow, pulsing beat that she felt in her very bones. She began to move, her body flowing with the rhythm in a way that felt both familiar and thrillingly new. In that moment, as the crowd cheered and the bass thundered through the floor, Lexi knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had transformed, yes, but she had also become more truly herself than she'd ever been before. The music swelled and Lexi danced on, her movements a celebration of her journey, of the person she had become. In the pulsing heart of the rhythm pit, she was home. And as long as the music played, she would keep dancing, keep growing, keep becoming more and more herself with every beat. As the night wore on and the energy in the club reached a fever pitch, Lexi found herself lost in the music, every worry and doubt forgotten in the rhythm. This was why she had made the choices she had, why she had undergone such a dramatic transformation. For moments like these, when nothing existed but the beat and her body moving in perfect harmony with it. The crowd's enthusiasm was infectious, their energy feeding into her performance. Lexi pushed herself harder, executing moves she'd been practicing for weeks with a newfound fluidity. She caught glimpses of awestruck faces in the audience, their eyes wide with admiration. As her set came to an end, the final notes of the song fading away, Lexi struck her finishing pose. For a moment, there was silence, and then the club erupted in thunderous applause. Breathless and exhilarated, Lexi took a bow, basking in the warmth of the crowd's appreciation. Backstage, she was met with hugs and high fives from the other dancers. Even Vivian, usually so composed, looked moved. "That was something special, Lexi," Vivian said, squeezing her shoulder. "You've really come into your own." Lexi beamed, still riding the high of her performance. "It felt special," she admitted. "Like everything just clicked into place." As she made her way to the dressing room to change, Lexi caught sight of Chris and Megan at the bar. They were deep in conversation, but when they saw her, they both broke into wide smiles and waved her over. "Lexi, that was incredible," Megan gushed as Lexi approached. "You've raised the bar for everyone." Chris nodded in agreement. "Seriously, we knew you were good, but that was on another level. We're so glad you're part of the team." Lexi felt a warm glow of pride. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'm just happy I get to do what I love." As they chatted, Lexi found herself relaxing more and more in Chris and Megan's presence. The fear of being recognized had faded, replaced by a genuine appreciation for their friendship and support. They were different people now than they had been when she knew them as Aiden, just as she was different. But there was still a connection there, a shared love for the music and the atmosphere of the rhythm pit. Later that night, as Lexi lay in bed, the echoes of the music still ringing in her ears, she reflected on how far she'd come. From that first nervous night at the club to now, a star performer and trusted advisor. The journey had been long and at times difficult, but she wouldn't change a thing. She thought about Aiden, about the person she used to be. There was no regret, no longing for that old life.
Aiden had been the cocoon, necessary for a time, but always meant to be shed. Lexi was the butterfly, vibrant and free, finally able to spread her wings and fly. As she drifted off to sleep, Lexi's dreams were filled with music and movement. In her dreams, she danced through transformations, each step bringing her closer to her true self. And when she woke the next morning, it was with a smile on her face and a song in her heart, ready to face whatever new adventures the day might bring. The Rhythm Pit continued to evolve under Chris and Megan's ownership, with Lexi playing a crucial role in shaping its future. They introduced new themed nights, bringing in diverse crowds while still maintaining the club's unique atmosphere. Lexi's dance classes became increasingly popular, with students ranging from complete beginners to aspiring professionals. One evening, as Lexi was wrapping up a particularly challenging class, she noticed a young woman lingering by the door. The woman looked nervous, reminding Lexi of how she'd felt on her first visit to the club. "Can I help you?" Lexi asked, approaching the woman with a warm smile. The woman startled slightly, then nodded. I was wondering if it's too late to sign up for classes. I've always wanted to learn to dance, but I've never had the courage." Lexi felt a surge of empathy. "It's never too late," she said gently. "Everyone starts somewhere. Why don't you come to my beginner's class tomorrow? No pressure, just to see if you like it." The woman's face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing, thank you!" As the woman left, a spring in her step, Lexi felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She was not only living her own dream, but helping others find theirs as well. Months passed and the Rhythm Pit flourished. Lexi's reputation grew, attracting attention from dance companies and music producers. She was offered opportunities to perform in other venues, even to tour with famous artists. But each time she politely declined. The Rhythm Pit was her home, her heart. She couldn't imagine leaving it behind. One night, after a particularly energetic performance, Lexi found herself sitting at the bar, chatting with Chris and Megan. The club was winding down, the last few patrons filtering out into the early morning light. "You know," Chris said, swirling the ice in his glass, "sometimes I think about how close we came to losing this place. If we hadn't bought it when we did." Megan nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's funny how things work out. We came here looking for an investment opportunity, but we found so much more." Lexi felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. "This place, it's everything to me." Chris and Megan exchanged a look, then turned back to Lexi with warm smiles. "We know," Megan said, "and that's why we want to offer you a partnership in the club." Lexi's eyes widened in shock. Partnership?" Chris nodded enthusiastically. "You're the heart and soul of this place, Lexi. We want to make it official. What do you say?" Tears welled up in Lexi's eyes as the full impact of their offer hit her. This was more than just a job or a passion. It was her whole world, and now she was being offered the chance to truly make it her own. Yes, she managed, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Chris and Megan hugged her, congratulating her and already discussing future plans, Lexi felt a sense of completeness wash over her. She had found her rhythm, her place in the world, and now that place was truly hers. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.